Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a grim, dark fable that brilliantly illustrates the psychological forces designed to suppress our own human potential. You know that feeling when your own mind seems to be working against your greatest ambitions? Well, you are going to find today's source material absolutely fascinating. We're unpacking a literal masterclass in psychological self-sabotage, all presented through the really chilling metaphor of a High Inquisitor and his Dark Order of Knights. So let's get right into it. Okay, to understand how our minds trap us, we first really need to define this terrifying blueprint enforced by the Inquisitor Knights. The source texts describe something called the architecture of fear. Now, this isn't just about feeling scared. No, it is a dark liturgy. It's a systemic, psychological blueprint designed by a metaphorical High Inquisitor to literally ossify the psyche, to turn your fluid creative potential into rigid bone. Because honestly, who needs an actual physical dungeon when your mind can build a bespoke one just for you? The ultimate goal here is to preserve a stagnant status quo by entirely suppressing your individual potential. And to do this, the mind deploys three specific psychic enforcers.
So here's our structural blueprint for today's masterclass. We'll start with the architecture of fear, then look at the superego through the Jester Knight, memory through the Bard Knight, and the ego through the Shadow Knight. Then we'll cover the complete Liturgy of Suppression before ending with the final stone silence. Part 1. Superego and the Jester Knight's Vanity. Let's start with our first guest lecture. Imagine the Byronic superego, draped in motley, acting as the high priest of vanity. This is the Jester Knight. He manages the containment of the soul, and he targets what he mocks as the stained blueprint of a god hiding inside you. He uses a psychological defense mechanism called narcissistic identification. Listen to how he speaks to us. I weaponize the cracked mirror found in the mud, feeding them the intoxicating nectar of pride. It's incredibly insidious. He doesn't crush your dreams directly. He inflates your ego so much that you mistake your fragile persona for actual divinity.
So instead of letting the fire of your imagination turn dull lead into the steel of heroism, he methodically uses something called inverted sublimation to immobilize your vanity. The methodology here is a three-step trap. First, he identifies the dreamer and feeds them pride. Then comes the transformation. This is where the dark alchemy really happens. Usually, sublimation turns our base urges into great creative works, but he executes an alchemical inversion. He uses your own creative spark to literally melt your vanity into rigid bonds. And the final goal? Your fragile persona becomes its very own executioner. And this brings us to the specific architectural trap he builds for you. He locks the soul in a remote, pitch-black recess, totally secured by heavy iron shackles. By feeding you that intoxicating nectar of pride, he guides you completely away from the real world where you could actually achieve something and traps you in a delusional remote corner of your own mind. You think you're wearing a crown, but you are actually wearing iron shackles of your own making.
Moving on to part 2, memory and the Bard Knight's suffocating guilt.
Next, the Bard Knight steps forward. He's the third pillar of this dark order, functioning as the high priest of memory. Now, if the jester uses your pride against you, the bard uses your past. His entire doctrine relies on the repression of historical trauma, anchoring your fears to prejudices, and totally dismissing your creative spark. His lecture is chilling. He says, I am the perverted gardener, forcing the soul to nourish itself on the bitter fertilizer of the past. He weaponizes your history. He takes historical trauma, your past mistakes, your deep-seated prejudices, and ensures your psychological architecture is anchored firmly in fear. The crucial mechanism here is effective displacement. Notice his chosen instrument. It's a lute made of dull lead that hums with the dismissed lives of the past. The method? Striking dissonant chords. Psychologically, this is effective displacement. He takes the anxiety of the past and displaces it right onto your present reality, just completely dissolving your ambitions. As a perverted gardener, his job is to prune away the deadwood of hope. His specific containment system is incredibly organic and terrifying. He cultivates thorns of the past that manifest as a literal physical weight against your lungs. This isn't just some mental block, it's a suffocating mist of guilt. The architectural structure he builds isn't made of stone like you might expect. It's an overgrown, thorny labyrinth of past traumas that wraps around your chest and makes it hard to even breathe life into new ideas. Have you ever been about to take a risk, but a past failure suddenly made your chest tight? Yeah, that is the Bard Knight at work.
Part 3. Ego and the Shadow Knight's Heavy Masonry.
Finally, let's hear from the absolute most terrifying enforcer of them all, the Shadow Knight, the state's reality testing agent. This represents your ego, but it's a hyper-pragmatic, deeply cynical version of it. He operates with a venomous grudge against chaos, employing pragmatic repression to crush what he sees as the vibrant branch of heroism. Imagine him stepping up to the podium, wielding a mask of silk. He states, "I prioritize the world as it is over the world as it could be. Human ambition is the poison of dissent." He looks at your biggest dreams and just sees a structural threat, a chaos that has to be contained for the sake of basic survival. Let's look at how he actually builds this. He wields a hidden trowel, right? A tool of masonry. He uses the psychological defense mechanism of structural compartmentalization to literally wall in the poison of your potential. Whenever you rationalize why you shouldn't take a risk or why you should just stick to the safe status quo, that is the Shadow Knight laying bricks. He follows a messy design to bring your ambition to a rigid final end.
The Shadow Knight builds the ultimate trap. He methodically seals your soul away behind solid walls of heavy masonry. He builds a permanent tomb within the deep ancestral vaults. He brings your life to a structural conclusion by burying your heroic silhouette, the person you truly could have been, deep underground.
Part 4. The Liturgy of Suppression and Mastering the Blueprints. Now, let's pull back for a philosophical deep dive and look at the High Inquisitor's complete, terrifying design perfectly mapped out. We can clearly contrast their distinct psychoanalytic roles, their methods, and their devastating impacts. Actually, imagine these three entities debating their dark craft within your own mind. The jester scoffs, "I use the cracked mirror to build them iron shackles of their own pride." The bard strums his leaden lute, countering, "Shackles can be broken. I use their memory to build a suffocating mist they can never escape." But the Shadow Knight just silences them both. "Fools, you play with feelings. I use a hidden trowel. I build walls of heavy masonry. I bury them." Together, these distinct architectural structures perfectly neutralize every single angle of your human ambition. And Part 5, the final stone silence and the fate of the dreamer. Which brings us to the ultimate, heartbreaking consequence of this psychic ossification. The process concludes not with a glorious song or a massive rebellion, but with the quiet, permanent immobilization of your soul within the kingdom's rigid structures. The texts tell us that any vibrant branch of change, literally any spark of heroism or new idea you might have, is successfully grafted onto the twisted roots of the established order. Your potential is neutralized, digested, and made to serve the exact stagnant reality you so desperately wanted to change. So, we leave you with this final, truly provocative thought to ponder about your own psyche. Has the architecture of fear already walled you in? When you think about your biggest goals in life, do you hear the gesture feeding your ego to keep you isolated? Do you feel the bard's suffocating mist of past guilt pressing on your lungs? Or do you hear the Shadow Knight's trowel, laying the heavy masonry of pragmatism right over your dreams? Recognizing these knights is the absolute first step to dismantling their architecture. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the structures of your own mind.